Hi, and welcome to this section of the Pre-Algebra Tutor. And in this section, we're going to tackle the topic of what we call exponents in algebra. You also might hear them referred to as powers. So the title of the section is Powers and Exponents. So up to this point in our journey to study pre-algebra, we've learned some very, very important things. We've learned about the concept between negative and positive numbers. And so now we're going to begin to get, I think, a little bit more into the realm that you might actually associate with pre-algebra or an algebra class. And that is, a lot of times students open a book and they'll see a bunch of stuff on the page. Of course, the variables x and y a lot of times confuse people. We've sort of broken down those barriers a little bit already so far. And the exponents a lot of times scare people because it's something different that you really haven't had to deal with in your basic math. It's something that looks a little different. You've got a little number up there raised a little bit higher. What does that really mean? And so a lot of students just try to memorize rules to get by without really understanding what they are. And I promise you, if you just understand what an exponent is, it's not a big deal. It's going to be something that's going to be very easy. And once you can master that, then moving along into the other topics is going to be so much easier. So let's talk about powers and exponents. The number one thing to remember is the term power. When you raise something to the power of 2 or to the power of 5 is exactly the same thing as when we talk about an exponent. They're not different from one another. So some books you might see them refer to raising something to the power of 3 or to the power of x or something like that, raising to a power of. And some other place in the book you might see it written as the exponent 2 or the exponent 5. Well, the word power and exponent really, for the purpose of this class, are really interchangeable things. And so we're going to treat it that way. So power and exponent is the same thing. So what is an exponent? What is a power when you raise something to a power? The short answer is writing an exponent is a short way of multiplying things together. Okay, when they're multiplied by itself. So it's just like back when you learned how to multiply numbers, you were taught multiplication is a shortcut for addition. You know, 5 times 4 is 20. That's a short way of adding up a bunch of stuff, right? Well, when you have a number multiplied by itself a whole bunch of times, it's actually faster and easier to write it as an exponent. So writing it as an exponent is just a shortcut for multiplication, much like multiplication is a shortcut for, addition. So it's a very simple thing. Now let's talk about it, and let's find out what this exponent stuff really is. If I have the number 3, let's say, and I'm going to raise number 3 to a power or to an exponent, same thing, of 2, right? So I write it as 3 squared. That's how you write this, because anything with a power of 2, we call it squared. But you could just say 3 raised to the power of 2. Couple of quick definitions that you might be asked on your tests. Not something that you use every day in your algebra calculations, but this bottom number, the bigger number here, is called the base. The reason it's called the base is because it's the bottom number, and also it'll make a little bit more sense when we write it out why it's called the base. This top number here is just exactly what we talked about a minute ago. This is called the exponent. So the only reason I'm even telling you this is because on your test you might see things like, what is the exponent in this problem? Or, identify the base in this problem. Or if two numbers have the same base, then what's going on here? So you're going to need to know what these terms are, but in your everyday calculations, you're going to get so used to dealing with these things that you're not going to really have to memorize this too often. Now, what does this mean when you say 3 raised to the power of 2? It's very simple. What it means is, literally for this problem, it means 3 times 3. And that's it, folks. I mean, that is the definition of an exponent by way of an example. You see, if I have 3 and I multiply it by itself, I can keep it on the paper just like that. That's no problem if I want to. I can say, there's nothing wrong with saying 3 times 3. We know the answer is 9, right? We know the answer is 9. But it might be simpler in a lot of cases to just write it in a shorthand way. So that's why I was saying that exponents or powers is just a shortcut way of writing down what you already know how to do, which is multiplication. It's really nothing more than that. It looks a little funny because you've never had to deal with it before. You've never had to learn and use it before. But it really is no more complicated than multiplication. So we write it like this. 3 is the number that you're multiplying by itself, and the upstairs number, number 2, is how many times 3 is multiplied by itself. How many times it's multiplied by itself. So anytime you see an exponent, what you've got going on is some number or some expression multiplied by itself. It has to be multiplied by itself this many times as given by the top number. So you're never going to have, different numbers, 3 times 4 and write that as an exponent. It has to be multiplied by itself in order to be able to write it as an exponent. And of course, the answer to this is just simply 9. So you might say to yourself, why would I even do that? Why wouldn't I just write 3 times 3 is 9? Well, you're just going to have to trust me a little bit here. When we get farther into the course, maybe we're not dealing with 3 times 3. Maybe we have x here or y here or something else raised to the power of 2. So this exponent stuff may not seem like it would be something you would use a lot when it's written like something simple like 3 times 3, but as we get into more complicated problems, it's something that you're going to use all the time. Okay, so let's go and just get our feet wet with a few other problems. Let's say we had the number 10 raised to the power of 3. 10 raised to the power of 3. What would that mean? Well, it's the same exact thing. When we have something like this, the base number is what's actually multiplied by itself. So it's 10 times 10 times 10. How do you know how many times to multiply 10 by itself? Well, that's given by the top number. So we multiply it 1, 2, 3 times. That's it. So 10 times 10 is 100, and 100 times 10 is 1,000. If you actually have a scientific calculator, if you take 10 and raise it to the power of 3, the calculator internally is going to do this multiplication, and it's going to spit out the number of 1,000. 10 times 10 times 10 is 1,000. Because 10 times 10 is 100, and multiply one more time, times 10 is 1,000. So, but it's the same thing. We've got the base here, 10, multiplied 1, 2, 3 times. That's given by the top number. What if we had, and we're going to do a ton of problems. I'm just giving you some really sort of basic ones here to get your feet wet. What if you had the number 7, and we're going to raise that to the power of 4. We're going to raise that to the power of 4. So, if you were going to do that, what would you have here? Well, you're always multiplying the base. So it's 7 times 7 times 7 times 7. You do it 1, 2, 3, 4 times because that's the number given in the top. And you could take 7 times 7 times 7 times 7, and you could put that in your calculator, and that would give you a number. That would be the answer, which is exactly the same as if you took 7 and raised it to the power of 4 in your calculator. So you see, literally it is a shortcut for multiplication. There's nothing else going on here magical. We haven't even used any x's or y's or anything that looks like algebra. We just sort of introduced this concept of an exponent. But you're going to see, as we go into subsequent sections and talk about equations and other things, that you're going to see these exponents pop up all the time. So it's very important for you to get comfortable working with them so that you're not worried about them. You're not struggling with trying to understand what that is. You've got that, so then you can go on to the other topics. All right, so let's talk about something a little bit more complicated. This is the basic idea of what an exponent is. Now, what happens if we try to multiply two things that have a power in it together? So let me draw a little line.